Well, today on the Practice of the Practice podcast, we have Jeremy Zug. He is the co-owner of Practice Solutions with his wife, Catherine. They do insurance billing, and they're just innovative thinkers. So today we're actually going to be talking about things outside of just insurance. Jeremy, welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Hey, thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me back on again.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this, and it's been cool to see how many people have been coming your way, and you guys are rocking it out with Practice Solutions.
Yeah, we are. It's been fun. It's been a good ride so far. So we're just going, rocking and rolling.
Yeah, I know last time we heard more of your backstory, but how have things been going since you were on the podcast last? Like, how many people have been joining you guys, and you're taking things off people's plates for them with insurance?
Yeah, so we service over 100 clinicians at this point. It's actually over 150. So it's good. We're learning a lot and servicing people. We've hired since then more staff, and more staff means you can do more things. And so we're looking forward to that. I think since the last podcast, we've added credentialing and paneling, and
which I'm so glad about. I was like texting you, like, you got to do this. And
it was a big part of it, and so now so we offer that, and we're glad to be able to offer more services, and so it's growing. It's good.
Yeah. Well, I think, so often, I was just on a call yesterday with somebody, and they were so overwhelmed with all of their billing, and they're like, I got to hire someone and train them. And I'm like, no, you don't.
No,
Like you literally could call Jeremy, and tomorrow they could start taking things off your plate and start that transition, so that within a month, how long does it actually take? I say tomorrow they could start helping you, but it's probably not accurate.
Well, yeah, it's about, the average transitions between 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay. So within 3 weeks, someone could totally have all of their insurance billing off their plate.
Yeah, and it's really affordable. I think that's the biggest misconception is if I hire somebody with all this knowledge, they're going to be way outside my budget. And that's just not true, right?
No.
You can get people that are really experienced and love what they do for less than, a full-time person with benefits, and that's really the point of outsourcing. It's like, well, I can save some, but still have it off my plate.
Yeah, I see it more as a multiplier, similar to adding an assistant, that when you have an assistant that answers the phone, they're getting paid, say, $15 an hour. If you charge $150 an hour and you do 1 extra hour, you can pay for 10 hours of somebody else's time. And
it's unreal.
Like a multiplier for you. And same sort of thing with billing or any other thing that you take off your plate. If you take IT off your plate, when you would have dinked around with WordPress for 5 hours, and probably did it worse than an IT professional, you have $50 an hour and they'd knock that out in an hour. And so it ends up being so much of a multiplier.
Yeah, and with billing, it's even more than that, right? Because it's like, let's say you have claims that are unpaid or haven't been submitted or whatever, then it's like we actually add money to the bottom line. So then it's not really at cost. It's like pay somebody to go get money that I would have never seen before.
Right.
And that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, today we're talking about the lean process, which it's interesting. You had brought that up when we were just chatting, I think it was last week or the week before. And I didn't know that you were a lean guy. And I remember when I first learned about lean, I was working at a community college, and they had a person that her whole job was to look at the college and see how they could enact lean. And so I was like, this sounds awesome, because I had a little business sense, but I wanted to learn more. So we had lunch one day, and I read, a bunch of books about it. So why don't we just start with what is lean?
Yeah. So very simply, lean is cycle time reduction through waste elimination. Now that sentence alone is lean unto itself, right? But basically you're finding the most efficient way to do something, and you cut the waste out of your processes, right? And so that's identifying your processes and then cutting the waste out, right? So there are multiple parts to that, right? But essentially you're doing only what's essential and eliminating any waste in your processes. So
this started in was it manufacturing world that kind of first started it?
Yeah, most of it was in the Far East, actually, right? When
was it Toyota?
It was Toyota. Yeah, it was Toyota and a couple other manufacturers that found that they could produce more with a higher quality through some of these practices, right? And they had less inventory on hand, and their people wasted less time, and they moved less, and they had bigger margins. And then American companies adopted all that. So you hear a lot of Japanese terms like Kaizen and all those things, but it's really applicable. But it's only been in the last, 10, 15 years that it's really hit the service industries.
Yeah.
Because people thought, well, lean is, Ford just down the road from us, right? But no, it can be applied to private practices, and it's incredibly valuable.
So let's talk about just some of the concepts of lean, and then we'll definitely talk about the application to private practice.
Yeah.
And so take us through just what are some ideas around lean that people should understand?
Yeah. So lean essentially is you would define, it's really 5 stages, right? And these 5 stages are applied across any organization really, but you would identify value. So in healthcare, and I'll talk, if that's okay, from a healthcare perspective, from
Yeah.
a patient's perspective. So you'd want to define value from the patient's perspective. You'd want to map the value stream or the key processes, and along with that, identify any issues or constraints in your process. Then you would remove waste. That's the 3rd piece. The 4th piece is you would implement solutions to those constraints and issues. And then 5, you would measure and continually improve your processes.
Well, I know at the college, they had kind of taken all those ideas and they did this thing called plan, do, check, adjust. And
Yes.
so first you plan out, like, what do you want to do with a project?
Right.
Then you do it, you give it a whirl, then you check, you have certain KPIs, key performance indicators, and then you adjust. And for me, that idea of adjusting and feedback being part of the loop has been essential for, especially with my virtual assistants. And so with Emily, my director of details, or Samantha, who's in South Africa, we meet every week and we talk briefly about like, what do we need to do, but then also hear some feedback on things. So rather than be like, we need to sit down and have a meeting about what you're doing wrong, it's just like, let's adjust as we go, because we're not going to nail it the first time and we're going to get better rather than try to make it perfect from the first get-go.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And then the PD, it's, the acronym PDCA, right? That's just that's fundamental, right, in the lean stuff. And there's like 10 or 11 lean methodologies that people have adapted. It seems like every year some consultant comes out with like the new lean thing, right? But
it's even leaner.
It's even leaner, right? Eventually we're just going to be
the beach body lean. It's losing weight.
Yes, perfect. So that's exactly right. Yeah, PDCA, and that works. To be honest, it's very pragmatic. It's like that tends to work for people, right? And anywhere from Ford and GM to your small private practice, right, or even your group practice, that can be applied.
Yeah. So what other kind of things do people need to know about lean before we talk about kind of why it's valuable?
Well, people need to learn that it's not meant to take forever, right? This is meant to be a quick, it can be done in a week. And I had, briefly, I worked for a manufacturing company where we did a lot of lean activities, right? We had a consultant come in and they came and we ran through the lean process in 4 days, right? And after 4 days, we saw massive improvement. So I think that's the big thing is this doesn't take it a year and a half to develop and then implement and then adjust, right? It's not that long. It's, 3-4 days where I look at stuff and then we make these changes and then we measure and adjust. It's not meant to take forever. And I think that's the important. So
if a practice owner said, I love that, what do? I want to spend 3 or 4 days focused in on my practice and having it be lean. Maybe they have a Friday, Saturday, Sunday that they set aside. They go to a coffee shop, go to a hotel, whatever. They get away to really kind of sort through this. What could that look like if they were going to say, I'm going to dive into lean over that 3 or 4 days?
Yeah. And I think this is exactly where we would talk about the application of lean, right? So I think I would get a whiteboard or those big sheets of paper, get some expo markers, some sticky notes. I would get a bunch of materials like that. And then I would have already prepared what your key processes are. What are your key business processes from the patient's perspective, from a marketing perspective, from a billing perspective, from a finance or, APAR perspective? What are your 5 or 6?
What's APAR in case someone doesn't know?
Yeah, accounts payable, receivable. How do you know how to pay your bills? Simple stuff, right? And you want to have those already in mind when you get there. Because if you get to your hotel or your weekend or whatever, and you don't know what your key processes are, and usually there are 5 to 8 for every business, then it's going to take a lot longer, right? And if you already have those documented, you have your key business processes already in mind, then it becomes a lot easier to do this kind of thing.
Okay, so you get all that information, you show up, and then what would that look like to then decide what your lean process is actually going to be once you have all that information? Yeah.
So first of all, and just to go through some of the basic processes of lean from an outline perspective, you want to identify, once you have your key processes, you want to map them out, right? You want to know what are my processes on a very granular level? So you have, your general business processes, right? So let's say from a patient's perspective, right?
Yeah.
What's valuable to a patient, right? So I think that's first and foremost. You know how a patient comes in your office and when they leave and schedule, but you want to identify what's valuable. So like basic, and in my mind, from a patient's perspective, there are 3 levels of things that a patient views as valuable, right? So there are basic things that they just expect. They don't ask for, they just expect that these things are done. Like billing is correct. They have the correct diagnosis, a warm office, prompt in and out times. They're not waiting after check-in and they're not waiting after check-out, like those kind of things, right? They don't really ask for those, they expect them. And then there are things that they expect, but they don't ask, but they specifically ask for, sorry. So there's basic needs not asked for, expected, and asked for. So like proximity, is your counseling office close to where I live and work, right? I don't want to travel 2.5 hours to get to you, right? That kind of thing. Reminders, text, email, voice reminders, right? People ask for those all the time. Free Wi-Fi, parking, things like that, right? And then there's the wow factor, things that they don't even know to ask for, right? Like the ability to pay online, right? Or even auto pay, right? So they don't have to think about it. Or the ability
to kombucha and coconut water in the lobby.
Yes, exactly. You walk in, there's like kombucha, coconut water. Wow. Right.
What's really funny is, so I just, a friend of ours is a distributor for this kombucha company. And I thought, well, we'll see, some people think kombucha is super gross and some people really like it. I'm one of the people who really likes it. First time I had it, I thought it was super gross. Kind of like the first time you have salt and vinegar chips. And then I brought them in and they went faster than anything else has gone in our fridge. People loved it. And so obviously I got to get some more kombucha.
You got to do it. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. One thing that we've seen recently is appointments that are auto booked versus via email. So it's like you come in, when's my next appointment done? And it goes to my phone or my computer. So I don't even have to think about it. I mean, that's great. So, you want to identify value from a patient's perspective. And I would start there, right? You arrive, you identify what's valuable, right? And then you want to identify in the lean, I'll use terms interchangeably if that's okay, but you want to identify key value streams, right? / business processes, right? So the lean methodology stuff is a little bit confusing. So, and that's what I meant in the beginning when I talked about, what are your patient processes? What are your admin processes? What are your marketing processes? Because all of these things form your private practice. Yeah, I don't know if you have anything else to add there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you understand kind of the flow that someone goes through and the value that they're looking for, that then helps you identify what's working, what's not working. And I think that's when you get to the step about removing waste. So often we just throw marketing up against the wall and see what sticks. We don't really know or even know to ask.
Why would we measure anything, Joe? I mean, marketing works, right? Doesn't everything just work?
Right, exactly. And so it's just okay, yes, I should put an ad in the local newspaper. Well, how do you know that works? And so learning to cut that waste. And I think one of the biggest wastes that we may get to is even just your own personal time and how if you're running full tilt towards your practice and what you want to do with it when you're in the office, or are you kind of dinking around for a bit?
Right, exactly, right. And I think the other piece of that to add, after you map your step-by-step processes, right? So for example, your patient completes the paperwork. How long does it take to get that information entered into your EMR, right? How long does it take to get an eligibility check done? Who's doing that work, right? Where is that all kept, right? And then, if you map each step and then correspond each step to a time value, that will help you in the end measure what works and what doesn't, right? Because let's say it takes you, Joe, 30 minutes to an hour to do an eligibility check. What could you be doing with 30 minutes to an hour of your time? How valuable is that to you, right? And that's actually incredibly valuable. And that's where we can get to the waste perspective. But I think first, before you even get there, you need to conduct a value add analysis, right? What's adding any sort of meaningful value to my processes here, right? And so with lean in a healthcare perspective, for a process to add value, there are 3 criteria it has to meet, right? First of all, the patient has to care about it, right? And that can be anything from your website, because you better believe people care about websites, right? It's it's why marketing companies exist, right?
Well, it's let me jump in there. So when my very first office, I was subleasing it as a percentage of what I brought in. So I paid 20% of whatever I brought in as my rent, but the amount I paid was above market value. So that office would have gone for $500 a month. My ceiling was $700 a month, but I paid 20%. And so if I had a down month or an up month, for me, that made sense. So start with that. I wasn't allowed to change the furniture. There was brass lamps. There was a accountant rolling desk.
Ooh.
The couch was this like cream and blue checkered pattern with flowers that looked like a picnic tablecloth.
Unreal.
Like it had this smell of like fake floralness. So it was not at all my ideal place.
It's like a funeral home.
It was, yeah. And so it wasn't the best place for me. I obviously have a much different style if you're looking at this video to see my style. So I had a great website though, and the website looked amazing. And one of the most common comments I got was, oh, this office is different than I expected based on your website. And so it just shows that if you have a decent website, people will have expectations about the quality of your care and the quality of your space. And so luckily people overlooked that. And I just said, oh, I sublease here just because we're getting going in the first couple of years here. We'll get our own space soon. And, they cared more about the counseling. But that just, I think, emphasizes how important an awesome website is, that you can have a really crappy space. And the space was decent. It just was a different style.
Sure.
You can have a space that doesn't fit you if your website looks great.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And the patients do care about it, right? So that's the first criteria, right? So these three criteria that, in order to evaluate value in your processes, three criteria. Patient has to care about it, fundamentally. 2, the activity that you're doing changes the patient or changes your knowledge about the patient. So like, is an eligibility process important? Well, yeah, because that could change like whether or not they show up next week. Or that could change how you get paid, right? So it changes a lot of things. Or like thirdly, the last criteria is the activity has to be done correctly the first time. So how often in the manufacturing world, it's called rework, right? If you create a product and you have to go back and fix that same product, that's a ton of waste, right? How often are your processes being done correctly the first time, or how often are you correcting them, right? And then that's where we get to the waste, right? And lean is all about these 8 wastes, right? And so they're essentially, looking at your processes, and not all the wastes apply to private practice. So I'll only talk about the ones that really I think apply, right? Because there's not a lot of rework necessarily that has to be done, except in my world, right? The billing, that matters to me a lot, right?
Sure.
Claim processing, if it has to be done again, that's a big problem, right? But if you look at your processes as you've mapped them out visually, right, with step by step, ask yourself some of these questions. Are you physically moving items too much? Are you physically going from one spot to another? Because that time can be measured, right? From me going, or maybe my office is too far away. I think that can count, right? It's like, do I have to drive an hour and a half to my office, an hour and a half back? What could I do with 3 hours a day, right?
Yeah, I was just talking to a consulting client who she sees people on Wednesdays and Saturdays at a different office that's an hour away. And so we looked at how busy she was at her office that's right by her house, and then said, how many clients would you actually need there to make it work? And it was amazing how, I think she only needed like 2 or 3 clients at her full fee rate to make up for that time. And it was, for her, the amount of lost money from just sitting in the car. When we actually ran the numbers to say how much she was losing by going there. Yeah, great example.
Yeah, and that matters, right? All of this really matters, right? And so maybe if you're in a situation where you have to travel, right? My perspective would be listen to a podcast, listen to valuable content, right? Because that will optimize that time. Mm-hmm. There shouldn't be any time in your workday, I don't think, that's wasted, right? You should always be moving towards something or doing something, and you don't have to get to the granular of detail, but just to maximize your time really, really matters, right? The other part of that, as far as transportation, right? So the waste of transportation or the waste of moving is like, how organized is your computer or your physical notes that you're writing on? Because if you have to look for stuff on your desktop, that takes forever, right? I don't know if you've ever worked for an organization, Joe, where maybe the data server is a mess, right? Things aren't organized very well. And you have to like hunt and peck and search. And it's like, why? Why would you do that when you can know exactly where stuff is, pull it up, move on? that kind of thing is very important, right? And for us, it's really important that people's computers are organized, right? Because if we have to transition computers from one staff person to another, we need to know where to go to find everything, right? And we don't ever want waste there.
Well, the book First Things First has a really interesting idea of layering your activities. And so rather than just exercising or rather than just hanging out with your family, why not go for a walk with your family so you're layering things? And so for me, like I take the steps every day, even though it takes, well, I think it's actually faster than the elevator, but we're on the 4th floor. But I frequently try to, I don't always run up the steps, but I try to go up them faster than I would just kind of lollygag up to save time, but then to get that little extra bit of exercise or to walk just a touch faster than I normally would walk. Doing that saves me time, but it also then gives me a little bit of exercise. And so finding those micro things that you can add into your day, I think over the long haul helps you then make progress so much faster.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, right? So that's the waste of transportation. The other one is, and this is about like rework or doing things, but are you repeating anything that can just be done in one step? And I'll give you a good example for our line of work, right? So we submit secondary claims for people all the time, right? And secondary claims can be complicated, right? Because you have to get an explanation of benefits from the original payer. So is your prep process, can you get every ERA or every explanation of benefits for your secondary claims? That's the first thing. But secondly, you have to print them out, you have to match them, you have to expense them, you have to document that you sent them, you have to scan them in, and then you have to actually fold them and mail them, right? And that process for us is, multi-layered. And so we had one process. We did this exact exercise with this process, and we took it from like 15 steps to 9, almost in half of that process, and got everything we needed to done because we realized we were repeating steps, right? And then we realized that the actual mailing of those claims, there was a lot of waste there, right? We had to like go get the envelopes from over there, and then they have to go get postage from this drawer, and then we have to compile it right on our desk, and then, we printed them off, so now we have to walk over to the printer, right? And that kind of thing was bad. So we moved the printer onto the desk, right? We moved all of our necessary materials to within reach, and then we have a prescribed way that you lay everything out on your desk. So you go from computer to, claim, fold it up, stamp it, right in the mailbox it goes. And that has saved us a bunch of time. Actually, it's like incredible.
Yeah, so then, you guys can take on more clients. You can hire more staff. You can, those little bits of time, I think people forget about those 5 minutes. So this morning, for example, I had a meeting change and, excuse me, and so I worked on the podcast. And so now I have the next month of podcasts completed. And so I will find when I have those like 5 minutes before a meeting, I'll jump onto a Facebook Live. I'll do something in that time rather than sit around. And to me, then you can work less days because you get so much done. Like I work 3 days a week, but I sprint like crazy for those 3 days.
Right. And I think that, you're hinting at the value of lean processes, but that's exactly right. And I think in the context of a private practice, that's you can see more patients, right? More time. And this is something you harp on a lot, is your time is a huge asset of yours, right? And people don't realize that, or they're starting to realize that, I think, as I read more literature and articles. But if you can see more patients, why wouldn't you? It's like more patients equals more revenue. So that's another piece of waste. But then the other waste is, are you going from start to finish on your processes? So I like the idea of layering, but I don't like the idea of multitasking within a workday. You know what I mean? Because it's like you actually, multitasking causes you to work against your own schedule because you think you're getting more done, but you're actually limiting the potency of whatever you're working on. So it takes you twice as long, right? Mm-hmm. So are your processes going from start to finish without interruption? And that's really important. There's a lot of tools to do that, right? You can pause your emails, you can, and then you can manipulate your processes to be like, for us, claims go from start to finish, nothing interrupts that process. So that way we ensure that 100% of the time, things are getting submitted, money's coming in, we're getting a response back, right? We know every time a payer says, oh, that wasn't there, we can say, no, it's right there because of our process, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that just speaks to the idea of batching things, to, the amount of time we spend kind of getting into a project and then getting into a new project, like that's all lost time.
Oh yeah.
And so, for me, I'll batch record the intro and outro for all of my podcasts for a month. I'll get the mic out, that's, a couple minutes to get it out, to get it set up, make sure all the sound is good.
Right.
If I had to do that every time I did it versus I'm going to do 4 or 5 podcasts in a row, you just get so much more done when you do that batching.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why it's important when you start this process to map everything out and assign a time value. Because then you can extrapolate that time out for a year, half a year, right? That kind of thing. And that's really important at the end to really look at things. So then, okay, you've identified all your waste. You have identified what you can do better. So then now you get to implement a change, right? And I think this is the hardest part, right? Because I think we're afraid of change. I think that change is scary, but this kind of change is really great because.
Or I think people also don't necessarily know where to start. Like, okay, I see this waste, like,
right.
how do I change it?
Yeah. And I think that the best acronym I've heard in Lean is think fish, right? Fish. Focus on only one problem at a time, right? So you're not focusing on the whole process all at once or all of the business processes. Focus on one area. Right. Focus on, let's say, I don't know, pick an area, Joe, of private practice we could think about that's perhaps a problem area as far as the business processes.
Maybe keeping track of your accounting.
It's a great one, right? So where do all the receipts go, right? Do you have a QuickBooks, or are you doing it all in an Excel file, or do you have a CPA, right? So focus on that problem and map it from start to finish and figure out, what is the best way to do that, right? So you're only focused on how to track your accounting and how to track all of that stuff. You're not focused on, oh, well, then there's taxes in April and a quarterly payment down the road or whatever. It's like, no, just this one thing, right? And then you improve the one focus area, right? You improve that one thing before moving on to the next thing, right? So it's focus, improve, then you're going to sustain your improvement. So it doesn't, in the trainings that I've gone through, it's like you have to start somewhere. So just start with what you currently do, then move to the new thing, the new process that via your process mapping and rearranging your processes, that will save you time because you've looked at it, you can see it, you can quantify it, right? Then you sustain that improvement until it's a habit. And then and in Fish, it's honor through rewards. So you reward yourself for continuing that process. And then I would add, you want to continue improving that process. So
the H of Fish is habit?
H of Fish is habit, right?
Okay.
Sustain and then habit, right? And then, of course, along with the Lean stuff, you want to monitor and then adjust, right? So did that work? How much time did that save? Did it save me any time, right? And if it didn't, look at why it didn't, right? What was the problem? But that's really a fundamental place to start, right?
Yeah. Wow. There's so much here. And I know that I'm going to have Sam put together kind of some infographics to bring it together, some checklists for people.
Great.
So when we think about private practice, what are a few other applications of Lean process to private practice?
Yeah. So I would say from my perspective, there are 4. So there's the patient processes. So a patient, you've gotten a patient, right? You've developed your referral sources, all that stuff that Joe's really good at, right? But you have a patient, right? Where's the paperwork coming from? How do they get it entered? How are they going to pay, right? What's the interface with the EHR, right? The electronic health record. How does the billing work and all that, right? Then there are the admin processes, right? In my mind, like bookkeeping. And I think billing interfaces with patients and the admin processes too, because we deal with revenue and all that. And then there's marketing processes, right? So those 3, I would say, patient, admin, marketing, right? Because all those, in my mind, in a very general global sense, make up a practice. I don't know if you would add anything there.
No, I mean, I'm sure there's lots of other processes we could do,
Right.
but I think that really kind of captures the core processes.
Yeah, and so I would start there. I think those are the applications there. And of course, in my mind, there's a lot of application with billing, right? Because billing is multifaceted, it's complicated. How does everything get tracked? And that's our core competency, is looking at, let's lean down on the billing processes, right? Because we want you to get paid correctly the first time. We don't want any claims reworked. We want all this stuff to flow smoothly. right? And that's really where the value of outsourcing for marketing, like you said, do you want to spend 6 hours on WordPress figuring this out, or do you want to outsource to somebody who like knows what they're doing and can get it done in an hour and then you're done? You know what I mean? It's like that kind of thing. But those would be the 3 areas that I would say are most applicable to private practice.
Awesome. Well, we're going to get a lot of resources put together from all the stuff that Jeremy has shared with us today. So if you want to go over to practiceofthepractice.com, just search for Jeremy's name or search for Lean or go into just the podcast section. There's lots of ways that you can get the information that we're going to develop from what Jeremy covered today. Also, Jeremy, if people want to connect with you with Practice Solutions and take billing off their plate, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, so I would go to practiceofthepractice.com/fun. I think that's our thing.
Yeah.
So because we make billing fun. So yeah, go to that landing page and fill out the little form, and that'll go directly to me. So that will come right to me, not some sort of info at whatever email. It goes to a person. So
awesome.
Then I'll reach out to you.
Well, I love what you and Catherine and everyone over at Practice Solutions are doing. Thanks so much for being on the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me on.